We go now to Pike County, Ohio, where jury selection begins today for George Wagner IV, one of the family members charged in the chilling 2016 massacre of the Rhoden family. The victims, ranging from 44 years old to just 16 years old, were shot and killed execution style at 4 different residences, and 4 family members of a different family were charged in connection to the murders, those being from the Wagner family. And the possible motive? A child custody battle. Since the investigation, 2 out of the 4 Wagners charged have pleaded guilty in order to avoid the death penalty for all of their co-defendants. I'm talking, of course, about the defendant's mother, Angela, and brother, Jake. But it should also be noted that George Wagner IV's father, George Billy Wagner, also faces charges as well. Now, this is supposed to be a weeks-long jury selection process, but the good news is, and right now, is that Law&Crime's own Angenette Levy is reporting to us live from outside of that courthouse and will be inside that courthouse to give us the latest on the proceedings. Angenette, good morning to you. It's good to see you. What is the latest out of Pike County?
Well, good morning to you, Jesse. 1,000 prospective jurors have been summoned here to the Pike County Courthouse. They've already filled out a 21-page juror questionnaire, and this will help attorneys on both sides, for the state and the defense, determine whether or not 12 jurors can be fair and impartial when considering whether or not George Wagner IV is indeed guilty of those 8 charges of aggravated murder. This is also a death penalty case, and so these jurors will have to be what's called death qualified. That adds an additional layer to the jury selection process. So that's why this is expected to take so long. And there's an interesting twist to this being a death penalty case. These jurors will have to be death qualified, despite the fact that as part of Jake Wagner's plea agreement, he asked that the death penalty be taken off the table for himself and all of his family members. So you might be asking yourself, why would we have to have a death qualified jury then? Well, the answer is pretty simple. The prosecutors in this case have said that Jake has to follow through on his end of the deal and testify to the satisfaction of the prosecution before the death penalty specifications will be removed from the indictments or the charges for the remaining Wagner family members. So a lot hinges on Jake Wagner's testimony. He has to testify, as they've said before, to the satisfaction of the state. So this jury could return a guilty verdict and find that George Wagner IV should get the death penalty. We'll say that happens. Then later, I guess, that death penalty, that the death sentence would be then removed somehow through the court process.
Angenette, what do we know about pretrial motions? What do we know about what has been argued from both sides leading up to this process?
Well, we know that George Wagner IV's attorneys have argued that he shouldn't be facing any aggravated murder charges because they say he didn't pull the trigger that night. Apparently, Jake Wagner has told prosecutors that Jake, Billy, and George all went to the homes of these Rhoden family members and carried out these murders. Jake personally admitted to firing a gun that killed 5 family members. But apparently Jake has told, according to George's attorneys, Jake has told prosecutors in his statements that George didn't actually fire a gun, although George was there when this happened. And in the state of Ohio, that's enough. He knew about it, according to the prosecution, and went along for the ride that evening. Angela Wagner stayed home with the children. She has pleaded guilty and will be eligible for release. She will be released after serving 30 years. Jake, meanwhile, has agreed to spend the rest of his life in prison. So that's one of the motions, or the pretrial motions, that has been argued in this case. George Wagner IV's lawyers basically saying he shouldn't be charged with aggravated murder. But as I said, you know, he apparently knew about it. He was along for the ride and a part of this conspiracy that's been alleged. So that is why the murder charges remain.
Well, let's just talk scheduling for a moment. We know this is going to be a long process. Any idea when we are going to have opening statements? And also talk to me about, is this a bifurcated trial? Are we going to see 2 separate phases? You mentioned the death penalty. Logistically, when do you think that this is going to start? And when do you think that this is going to end?
Well, the trial opening statements are scheduled for August 29th, so we know they will start then. This jury selection process could take 2 weeks, it could take 3 weeks. That's why it's starting today. But the opening statements are scheduled for August 29th, and it will be bifurcated. There will be a so-called guilt phase. Should George Wagner be convicted, then they will move on to the so-called penalty phase, where the jury will hear evidence of why the state believes he should face the death penalty and why his defense attorneys, if he's convicted, say that he should be sentenced to life in prison and not death. So that's how it works in Ohio.